pleasure. Thank you for your time. Wanted to start first with a pretty historical question. Like, how do you guys? Why did you guys first propose the idea of client-side validation and early concepts related to RGB?
Well, I mean, client-side validation. I mean, this predates RGB for quite a bit. So it would have been about 2013. I remember I was like looking into, just thinking hard, but how does Bitcoin really work? And as I recall, I had like a thought experiment of, it doesn't really matter what's in blocks. Like, what if we took away that rule and just said blocks were data, and then the people validated what the data meant? And this can actually, one of the incentives for thinking about this was, well, how do we make it that people don't trust miners too much? Because currently, if blocks are valid, you assume miners are making valid blocks and people can get lazy and not check it. But if you're required to check it to know what's in there, then that could potentially be good. Of course, then that developed over time. I actually was hired as a chief scientist of Mastercoin, like an early embedded consensus system that put its consensus data on Bitcoin. And again, I was thinking, well, how could we do this better? And that turned into the idea of single-use seals and having math proofs that you're passing from person to person to say, hey, I had this asset, now you have this asset, and I have irrevocably moved it from me to you. And when you work through the math of how that could work, it turns out you don't actually need all the data in one place. You don't need the data on the chain. And notably, when I'm giving an asset to you, does our cameraman here care? Right? It's not his asset. He doesn't care if you get ripped off. And that was like one of those aha moments. Oh, okay. We can also make this more efficient. I don't have great things to say about colored coins.
And what actually that experiment got?
Yeah. So colored coins was weird because it was kind of this idea of, what if we, if you will, colored coins and said that certain coins meant certain things? And then people wanted to represent things other than Bitcoin on the Bitcoin chain. Because obviously, if I'm like issuing US dollar tokens, we would like to have a really good accounting system for who owns what. Bitcoin, one way to think about it is it's a really good accounting system for who owns what Satoshis. Well, if I just declare certain Satoshis are different than others, I can reuse that accounting system for a different asset. And Ordinals does this, although for different motivations. But the issue with colored coins is the idea of tying the Satoshis just doesn't make any sense when you think about it more clearly. It's like, I'm Microsoft, I want to issue 1 billion shares. Why on earth would I need 1 billion Satoshis to do this? Why don't I just decouple the consensus layer from the accounting layer? And that's where things like RGB came in.
I remember one of your tweets, like it was like something like that, something like, we don't like shitcoins, of course, but RGB is cool. The idea of tokens on Bitcoin is cool. What exactly did you mean by that?
I don't remember the quote, but I mean, I'll say like what that would really mean is, so you have to distinguish between the different categories of assets here. At one end, you get straight up meme coins, which well and truly just don't have any backing. And the economic role of this ultimately winds up being gambling. People create a zillion meme coins a day. Some of them pump up for frankly no reason, just pure vibes. And you as the buyer, what you're really doing is you're buying a lotto ticket in this weird game of like meme poker. I mean, meme poker is probably a good term for this. Like, yes, there's skill to it, but it's skill in like weird meta level psychology. It's, it has no economic meaning. Now, at the other extreme, you get things like USDT. Like it or not, US dollars are valuable. They're useful in business. A lot of stuff's priced in them. If I can send you a US dollar over the internet, clearly that's useful. And that is why if you go to a place like, Ukraine, for instance, USDT is widely accepted. I mean, I've personally seen people go to a computer store, and not even one they specially picked out, just go to one at random, go buy a laptop, and just happen to ask the cashier, oh, by the way, could I pay in USDT? And they say yes, and you just pay in USDT. I mean, it's, there's no like politics behind it, it's useful, clearly useful. The laptop store probably sent the USDT to their supplier the next day and bought more laptops. Like, it's just obvious. I'd say then there's the Bitcoin side of things, which is sort of almost immune reaction to shit coins, as in anything that's not Bitcoin. But anyway, I want to go above all that and just say, look, obviously people are going to want to do accounting for different reasons. Clearly, if we have a good accounting layer, people are going to be able to do all those things better. Well, I think a lot of how to make those predictions really comes down to how does RGB protocol evolve. So on my website, if you scroll down a bit, I have a blog post, not specifically about RGB, but just talking about how you can use client-side validated tokens to do essentially unlimited scale token transfer with slightly different trust assumptions than say Lightning. Read the post, Columbus explain. Now, in that world, hypothetically, maybe we would live in a world where, NASDAQ, like every big stock exchange in the world, ultimately has an accounting layer that ultimately gets traceable to Bitcoin.
Real world assets.
Yeah, yeah. And in that world, obviously, Bitcoin would certainly have more prestige in the sense that clearly, there'd be literally even just so many sysadmins who use the system knowing, ultimately goes down to Bitcoin. But the curious thing about this is that doesn't necessarily mean it's good for Bitcoin price, because all of these use cases don't necessarily hold Bitcoin. And these use cases can be made so efficient technically that they don't even have to pay much Bitcoin fees. I mean, we really could, hypothetically, trade all of the world's stocks on like 140 transactions per day, with being able to make a movement every 10 minutes, every block. That is a possibility. In much the same way as my own open timestamps protocol, which timestamps data, a much simpler problem than RGB, but again, timestamps data. I can timestamp the entire world's data, every 10 minutes for like 144 transactions per day. Even less in some more efficient ways. Obviously, that's not going to drive Bitcoin price. I would say these are just systems which just coexist with Bitcoin. It's certainly good for Bitcoin in that you would have a lot of things which would break if Bitcoin broke. That makes it harder for governments to do a lot of nasty stuff to Bitcoin. It would make it a lot harder for them to, say, shut down Bitcoin miners, because suddenly you'd have people all over the world complaining. But is this going to push Bitcoin price up? Don't bet on it. So I did a big paper on L2s about a year ago, and I had started by what is actually an L2. I wouldn't actually say RGB is an L2 at its main layer. Like RGB with Lightning, yeah, you can say it's an L2 for RGB, but RGB itself, that's more of like an L1, L1.5, because it directly uses the properties of Bitcoin to get confirmation. When I send you an asset on RGB directly, without a second layer on top of it, you could be sitting in a cave for the next 10 years with your phone off, and that send would still be secure. Because unlike most L2s, you don't have to actively do anything, or even have someone else actively do something on your behalf. It just works. For Bitcoin, the unified system is already Lightning. All of these different L2s, they use Lightning as a layer to route payments around. Great example is the brand new ARC system. I mean, you literally go to arcade.money at the moment and just try it out. And of course, I'm not going to say it's secure yet, but if I want to pay you on ARC and you use, I don't know, let's just say Cashew as a hypothetical example, you're using a completely different way to hold value than I am, yet we'll route through Lightning to do it. Now, in the future, once we get L2s of various forms that represent, say, USDT tokens or Microsoft shares or who knows what, as long as they're an asset that's fungible, we can have the same kind of effect with L2, with Lightning like L2. And one of the really fundamental things here is I think the TLC mechanism in Lightning seems to be like a fundamental invention in computer science. We're probably still going to use it in 100 years because it seems to be just one of those things where you discover it and now we can power everything. We'll tweak the exact details, but this idea of you reveal a secret to let a payment get routed through, that seems like a fundamental invention. In much the same way as that, like banking itself, well, maybe not cryptographic, works the same way. If I send a wire transfer to you and you're in a completely different country, the payment is actually routed hop to hop to hop to hop, just like Lightning. And I'm sure RGB with, the example Microsoft shares, that's going to be how it works. Now, I want to be clear, there's a whole other type of category, the non-fungible assets, where Lightning just doesn't help. That trick of, let's take a lot of transactions, collapse them to one, doesn't help. If we're selling land, you really care that land here it's just not the same as land there. Like, I can't put that in a Lightning channel because it just doesn't make any sense to give you like, 1% of that land. I mean, who buys that? But that's why RGB can also, in the long run at least, with more improvements, scale transactions per second for things that aren't necessarily fungible.